Hi there. In this video, let's discuss exists operator in SQL, right? These examples are written on MySQL, but exists and not exists, you can use it on any SQL database, right? That being said, if you haven't watched my previous videos on how to write simple select statements, joins, I advise you to watch those videos before watching this video, right? So let's jump right into this. What is exists, right? What is exists? Exists operator in SQL can be considered as a Boolean operator, right? Boolean means true or false, right? So that's what Boolean is, right? It returns either true or false. So um, exists is more about always it treats about existence of a record. It doesn't need not necessarily verify each and every record. If in a massive volume of record set, even if the one record set exists, that's it. That's what it matters to this exists operator, and it will give a true signal to the SQL above it, right? So I'll explain that with an example. I'll explain exists and not exists in two different examples, and I'll also explain exists using exist operator more like in a join kind of a fashion, right? Joining two tables kind of a thing, right? And also I'll explain how you can extend exists with other SQL statements as well, right? So that being said, let's go through a simple example. In this example, what we are doing is uh, um, let me explain the subquery first. In the subquery, we are just getting the books whose sales are over $40, right? So those are the books we are interested in, right? And if you observe here, if I execute the SQL by itself, you can see these are all the book IDs that whose sales are above $40, right? And then I placed an exist here, right? What exist does is when it executes the subquery, right? Right. This is a subquery right here. And even if one record, even if the subquery returns even one record, right? Exists will send true signal to the SQL above. Okay. So one more time. So exists is a signal, a true or false signal generator, right? So which means if the SQL below the exists, right? Within the exists, this is called the subquery right here. If that returns even one record, right? Even with one record, it immediately exists will send a true signal to the query above it, right? So if you observe here, even though it's only like few books that got sales around $40, but if you execute the whole SQL, because it's only the true signal is provided to the main query, so the main query actually shows all the books, right? Irrespective whether there is a sale or not, because again, once again, exists will only sense the true signal. It will not gonna match the records or anything like that, right? So that is the key difference that you should understand. Now, what is not exist, right? What is not exist? Not exist is simply you put not in front of exist, right? What that does is it's exactly the opposite of exist, right? Which means not exist returns true if the subquery returns no records, right? And false if the subquery returns a record, right? So, which means in this case, this subquery will return records because obviously we checked in the previous example when you execute it, you see some records coming out of it because it says not exists, which means it is true when there is when the subquery returns no rows, and it is false when the subquery returns some rows. So in this case, it is false, right? Because it is actually returning some record, so not exists. So in this case, if you query this SQL, it's not going to return anything because this not exist sent a false signal to the query above it, right? Please watch what I have mentioned like just now and in the beginning of the video, so you will understand the main differences between exists and not exists. Now moving on to the next example, right? In this case, in this example, we are using exists and we are selecting book IDs. And if you observe here, I'm using a join kind of a functionality here. So for the folks who learned who watch my videos on join, there are number of ways to join tables actually. I just showed you the most efficient way by introducing joins and left joins and right joins, whatnot all. But you can also join two tables in a where clause, right? But let me explain the subquery here. And until here, all good. But in the where clause, what it is doing is it is ensuring that every book ID, right, that is having a sale is validated against the book ID in the books table, right? Because you'll see the alias here, right? So if you observe here, book sales alias is BS and B dot. So now what this does, right? Carefully listen here. In this example, each record, each book ID from the books table, right, is checked against the book ID in the book sales table. Okay. If the book ID, so every time a select select query brings up a record, right, a book record, what it does is first it will verify it against book sales table right here using this condition. And if the condition is true, which means, sorry, if this subquery returns a value, then the exists will send out a signal, a true signal to the query above. And then it iterates to the next record, next book, right? Book number 2. The book number 2 has a entry into the book sales. Basing upon this condition, automatically, the exists will send a true signal to the SQL above. So this SQL pretty much works pretty similar to a join condition, right? Because if you execute this SQL, it pretty much like, displays all the books which have at least one sale, right? Now it coming to not exist. So how this works is it's exact quite opposite to this, right? So in this example, we are trying to display all books whose which did not get sold, right? So if I execute this SQL, so what this does is book number 1, right? First, it will verify the book number 1, right? And 1 equal to 1. Obviously, there's a sale on book ID 1, and this will display a record, right? And when that record comes out, not exist will come into play, and because there's an active record, not exist will send a false signal to the SQL above, and hence that particular record will not be displayed. And then it goes to book number 2, book number 3, book number 4, book number 5. When it reaches book number 5, it again verifies the subquery, and now the subquery actually does not return any records, right? Then not exist will send a true signal to the select statement, and the and the record will be displayed like displayed out here. You need to practice it for you to understand. However, I just want you to understand exists, right? Is something that is much faster compared to using a join condition or a in operator, right? You might have watched my SQL videos on in operator. So using exists and not exists is always faster than other statements, right? Because exists operator works based on at least found principle, right? So that is very, very important to keep that in mind. But where does in operator will work faster is when there is a few set of records that that are selected from the subquery, right? So when you have smaller amount of records being generated from the subquery, then in clause will in operator will actually works faster. And then if not, in most cases, there will be always a bulk amount of data that will be generated in your subqueries. So in that cases, exist will be much faster. So that being said, ensure that you play around with the operators, understand the performance of your SQL, right? So thank you for watching my videos. Take care.